Antimage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1. Audiobook by Kevin Chapter 13. A grave threat. Nathan didn't sleep well. Davrar was full of wonder, and ruins they'd passed filled him with a sense of adventure. On Earth, history was known. If you found a ruin, you could find out who had built it and why. The horizons were charted, and the only mysteries left were in science. On Davrar, ruins outnumbered cities by 100 to 1. And each one promised adventure and, more likely than not, death. With that in mind, Nathan couldn't help but wait for something to jump out of the dark. Now was the time, right? He paced around the camp, seeing a pair of the vanguard on a desultory watch. They beckoned him over, but he shook his head and went back to his blanket. Eventually, he slept. The next morning, Nathan woke bleary-eyed to quick movement and the clash of metal. His eyes snapped open and he jumped to his feet, frantically looking around to find the fight. It wasn't a fight, but a fully armored spar between Arthur and Eldred. It didn't look like a friendly fight, but everybody stood around and watched as Eldred defended himself from Arthur's furiously twisting staff. The heavily armored human spun and wove, catching blows with the haft of his two-handed mace. After a breath, he went on the offensive himself, swinging the mace deceptively quickly. Arthur backstepped and deflected with his staff. One of the swings connected with the ground and rock shattered, sending shards zinging around the clearing. Arthur snapped forward to take advantage of the grounded mace, but Eldred slid under Arthur's strike and shoulder-checked him. Amazingly, the enormous centaur went down, toppling with a tremendous clatter. Eldred raised his mace over Arthur and the crowd tensed. Nathan started forward, but then Eldred relaxed as Arthur spoke. "I yield. You have the better of me." He was tense, looking up at the human clad in heavy plate. Eldred just spread his arms wide, holding his enormous mace negligently in one hand. He beamed around at the crowd, savoring his victory. Vihala and Emerald emerged from the crowd and helped Arthur up, Vihala shooting Eldred a dirty look as they did so. They helped Arthur up and moved to the side, leaving Eldred to a round of backslapping congratulations from the vanguard. Nathan came up to them as Arthur gingerly flexed his legs. "So what was that about?" Vihala turned to him with a grimace. "A bit of adventurer politics. He was pushing, and Emerald insulted him to distract him. He issued about challenge and response, and Arthur answered." Emerald spoke next quietly. "Thanks, Arthur. You didn't have to do that." They were helping Arthur remove his heavy armor, storing it carefully in the bag of holding Nathan had seen earlier. Arthur snorted, still breathing heavily. "You fight to kill." That bout would have only ended with heavy wounds, especially as he doesn't hold you in the same respect he does me. This gave him more status, and it should end here. Nathan was flabbergasted. "That sounds really dumb. That fight was over pecking order, or do I not understand what status means?" Vihala shook her head. "No, you've got the right of it. Status, honor, bravado. To some adventurers," she nodded towards Eldred, "it is their lifeblood, and he was pushing for information on you. Beware. With this loss, we cannot challenge him any more on this trip." She frowned, then called out loudly, "Eldred, congratulations on your victory. Should we depart? These people need to get to Gemor." The bald man wiped his brow with a rag and looked up at Vihala's call. "Yes, we should go, come one and all, to Gemor and freedom." He raised his mace high, the picture of a heroic fighter. He looked disappointed at the raggedness of the responding cheer. Nathan spoke under his breath to the giant traders. "I'm really not a fan of that guy." They all nodded in response, then left to finish packing the camp. Nathan made himself scarce, checking in with Sora and Duo and carrying a couple of extra bags for the weaker refugees. He tried to talk to them but only got scattered responses. The villagers seemed wary of him and the adventurers in general. Nathan understood why, but it disheartened him that these people's protectors weren't held in higher esteem. Soon after, Arthur approached. Nathan opened his mouth to welcome him, but the elk centaur held up a hand. "I must apologize for my request earlier. I am glad you chose to fight with us, but I should not have posed a demand phrased as a question to which there could be no refusal." He inclined his head, resolute and grave. "The picture of a muscular silver fox. He's pretty hot. At least the human half is. I'm really not sure how to deal with the elk half. This crush is weird, and not just because he's admitted to manipulating me into a lethal combat situation. I don't really blame him for that. It's hard to look around at ex-slaves and not feel proud of my role in that." While Nathan was distracted, Arthur continued, "I think my debt to you is larger than an insight freely given in the moment before a fight. I will continue to teach you the use of anger in combat, but I would also guide you in the ways of Davrar and Gemor. If you will accept it at least." He arched an eyebrow. Nathan swallowed. "Yeah, that sounds good. I don't know what to ask, but I'll take you up on that later. Thanks. Do you have anything else to tell me now about anger or something else?" Arthur nodded deeply again. "If you decide to follow this path, you should know how it will influence your style. Using rage while fighting is powerful, granting you strength, speed, and the ability to ignore wounds and some magic. A full berserker will rampage above their level and will not stop before death. And many rage classes contain valuable class skills to surpass defenses or overcome restrictions. But there are drawbacks. The rage and many of the class abilities that stem from it consume your class resource quickly, and when you run out, you will be vulnerable. It is also harder to think strategy while enraged, and baiting somebody with a class on the path of rage is common among those with experience. These weaknesses can be corrected with preparation. A skill or talent for calmness or strategic thinking, which can be used in combat, will aid with the tempering of rage. The rapid draining of your class resource is a harder problem. You can learn to manage it well, or shape your training to encourage class skills which expand your pool. Another solution is to pick talents that will replenish your class resource. These are difficult to gain and situational. You would not be able to use the one I know of, so I will not teach it to you." He paused. "These words are between us now. Do you want to walk this path?" Nathan considered. It felt like the decision had already been made. He decided to fight, and this style suited him. During the battle, the anger felt natural. Right. He'd managed his anger all of his life, learning restraint and calm. Cutting loose had felt freeing. The surge of adrenaline had been more than every extreme sport he'd ever done. No whitewater rafting or skydiving could compare to a life-or-death fight. If that's what the path of rage was, then that's what Nathan wanted. He spoke as much, formally, to match Arthur's speech. "Yes, I will learn of rage. How will you teach me?" Arthur smiled. "It can be hard to learn, for the only true practice is mortal combat. But the first requirement is to always summon your fury against those you fight. Once you gain a rage class skill, you will be less restricted, but you must keep the anger stoked, for every true fight in which you use it will improve your class. There are no true exercises I can give you, for the nature of these classes is a decision to remove restraint." He was about to continue when a clanking stomp heralded Eldred's approach, head shining under the sun. He swaggered up, armor brilliant. Up close, Nathan noticed that the plate was heavily decorated, engraved with delicate lines of red, silver, and gold metals. There were also tiny gems inset around the joints, though Nathan had no idea why. Probably magical shenanigans. "Looks expensive as hell." He addressed Arthur. "I think Valhalla was looking for you." He turned to Nathan, clearly dismissing Arthur. "Hullo, I hope you're holding up under the travel well." Arthur snorted, then opened his mouth. Eldred raised a hand. "Come on, who smacked who around in that little spar earlier, eh? Go on." He gestured away towards the main group of refugees. Arthur grimaced, then turned and left. "Okay, that was weird. Eldred won a duel, so he can order Arthur around now." Eldred turned back to Nathan and stepped closer to him, working his shoulders. Nathan thought that Eldred was trying to loom over him, but it didn't work very well. Eldred was probably about 6 feet tall, muscled and bulky in his armor. But Nathan wasn't an inch under 6'5", and definitely broader in the shoulders than the bald man, if not as heavily muscled. He looked down at Eldred from a foot away and refused to step back. The armored man looked up at him and furrowed his eyebrows. "So, what's the tale with you, eh? You're not a villager and you haven't been a slave." "Some of my boys asked the villagers and they said you fought with the giant traders but didn't have a wick of gear on you. It's a bit of a puzzle and I like to solve puzzles." "What's your name and where you from, boy?" Nathan answered easily. "I'm Nathan. I'm from a land far away, you've probably never heard of it. I got waylaid by Giant's Rest, escaped, and the giant traders found me." Eldred's eyes sharpened. "This land, it got a name. It's a republic called the United States of America," Nathan answered. For all he knew, Eldred had a skill to detect lies. Eldred frowned. "United States sounds big, must be far away if I haven't heard of it. Got a big army. The biggest in our region, it's pretty safe there." "Are you a member of that army, Nathan?" Nathan shook his head. Eldred's hand rose to stroke his chin. "So what's your profession and what were you doing all the way out here?" This was an interrogation, and any pauses would be taken as indications of lies or misdirection. So Nathan responded immediately, earnestly. "I do fine work with my hands, very delicate, and the trip wasn't really my idea. I've got no idea what direction leads home." "How'd you help in the fight, then?" "One of my talents lets me interact with magic. I messed with the magic of the Giant's Rest mages, helped the raiders put them down. Same way I escaped from Giant's Rest in the first place." Low-tier earnestness rank 5 achieved. One of Eldred's eyebrows raised artfully. "What you thinking about doing when you get to Gemor? Artisan? Adventurer?" Nathan was opening his mouth to form a response when he heard a yell from the back of the caravan. He turned and looked to see William freaking out, waving his arms and shouting. After a moment he must have cast a spell, for his voice boomed out, loudly audible to everybody. "That's a surge o' necromancy behind us. Everybody get moving forward, we gotta get some distance. Adventurers get air," Eldred swore. "Harpy tits." He turned and booked it towards the back of the convoy, where the giant traders and vanguard were assembling. Not having anything else to do and wanting to know what the hell was going on, Nathan followed. He arrived to hear William frantically explaining. "Naw, ain't an idea what's up. There's necromancy that-a-way." He pointed, roughly behind them. "Ift was 100 feet away, it'd be enough to raise a body. Ift was a few miles away, it'd be enough to raise an ending's damned army." Everybody turned in the direction of William's pointing claw, seeing nothing but a sparsely treed slope leading down to a shallow stream at the bottom of a valley. On the far side, a steeper scree slope ascended to a tall hill. Nothing looked out of the ordinary. That's probably not a good sign. If we can't see the necromancy, that means it's farther away, and bigger. Vihala spoke first. "William, message Gemor headquarters. They probably noticed already, but they might have forgotten where we are. We're all on rear guard until we're back at Gemor." The members of the vanguard looked to Eldred, who waved. "Theo, you're leading the column. The rest of us arms up." He reached back and unlimbered his enormous mace. The rest of the vanguard followed suit, readying their weapons. One figure, presumably Theo, exhibited an impressive burst of speed to reach the front of the group of refugees and exhort them to move faster. The next few minutes were tense, Nathan jogging up the slope while occasionally glancing back at the bare landscape. He was starting to relax, wondering if it could be a false alarm when an extended roar sounded. It was a sound like a landslide, combining shattering rock with a deep basso exhalation that resonated in Nathan's chest. He squinted back and made out rocks flying through the air. The airborne rocks were beyond the hill across the valley and arced slowly over the next mountain back. Nathan swallowed. Given the distance, those rocks were the size of 6-story buildings. He turned and kept hustling up the mountain, followed by the adventurers. The path had progressed to switchbacks, and the refugees filled it from side to side. Nathan kept running, occasionally checking over his shoulder at more enormous sounds, their source blocked by the hill on the other side of the valley. They'd made good progress up the mountain when a multitonal bestial roar sounded, and Nathan turned and stopped. A mountain of gray flesh had summited the hill behind them, nearly doubling its height. It was a single mass, but wasn't made of a single creature. A multitude of enormous skeletal snake heads emerged from the right side, while the left side was covered in long, tentacle-like protrusions. The main body was a giant pile of exposed flesh and bone. Some of the parts were enormous, rib cages and vertebrae visible from more than a mile away. Some were smaller, jumbled, and about the size of human bones. A wave of dark miasma billowed out from it, fast approaching. It was clearly magic, strong enough that the effects were visible to the naked eye. Before anybody had a chance to do much more than brace themselves, it hit. To Nathan, it felt like a slimy, wet fog, weighing down his limbs and draining energy from him. It was one of the most simple spells he'd ever felt, but there was so much that it blotted out the sun for a moment. The necromancy, or whatever, was clearly debilitating to everybody else, and they sagged, dropping weapons and struggling to stay upright. The two exceptions were Eldred, who planted his feet and set his jaw, and Artha, who started a low chant that limned his body in a faint white glow. William had vanished, and both Emerald and Vihala were staggered, barely staying on their feet better than the rest of the vanguard. Nathan spoke, awed and terrified. "What the fuck is that?" Eldred answered him through gritted teeth. "That's a fucking grave tangle. It's going to Gemor and we're in the way. Of all the hell stupid ways to go." The grave tangle advanced, sliding down the opposite hill with all the grace of an avalanche. Its heads reared back and a cavern opened in the center of its bulk, emitting another resonating roar from multiple orifices. A second wave of smoky energy approached, and Eldred groaned and lowered his stance to brace himself for this attack. It washed over them, and Nathan felt strength draining from his muscles. He checked his stamina and found it was down to 302-330. Eldred toppled, and Artha's chant faltered before he joined Eldred on the ground. Nathan was the only one standing. He turned his back to the monster and took off, straight up the slope, ignoring the switchbacks. The mana he sensed didn't even seem like a spell, or at least not a complicated one. There was just so much of it, and it seemed to inherently drain energy from people. Low-tier spell sense 4 achieved. Nathan spent stamina like it was going out of style, leaping up the slope in bounds. His awareness focused on finding footholds, using his notice skill for all it was worth. He pushed his muscles past their limits, feeding them stamina and regeneration to push himself up the slope in incredible bounds. Low-tier sprinting rank 5 achieved. Goddamn stupid, just a random monster pops out of nowhere. Whatever the fuck that is, it shouldn't exist. And why here and now? Nathan was pissed at the whole situation, and he fed stamina to his anger once more, feeling as if the anger was pushing him onwards. I should have picked somebody up before I ran, but then I'd be too slow. I'll still be too slow. His fury coursed through him, but instead of the thrill of battle, he felt sick anxiety. He tried to push his strides longer to get somewhere safe. An angled foot slammed badly into a rock, and Nathan heard something in his ankle pop. He tumbled and cursed, grabbing at his foot and slamming stamina through it to heal as fast as possible. Nathan's skin grew red, inflamed by the aura of the creature. After what felt like minutes, but couldn't have been more than seconds, Nathan's ankle felt stable and he resumed his run. While holding his ankle, Nathan confirmed that the grave tangle had crossed the valley floor and started climbing the slope. It was as wide as multiple football fields and moved deceptively quickly, its enormous size disguising the rapid movement. Low-tier sprinting rank 6 achieved. As Nathan approached the peak of the hill, he felt his attention pulled to a set of bright white specks streaking across the sky towards him. They advanced quickly, growing into humanoid figures in moments. One of them never slowed down, losing their glow but not the speed. Nathan caught a glimpse of a silver-armored figure carrying a golden glowing greatsword as it flashed over his head. The other figures slowed to a halt, two alighting atop the hill in front of Nathan, while the other two remained in the air. The flyers were clearly mages. One was surrounded by a halo of fire and lightning, while the other carried a staff capped with a brightly glowing crystal. One of the grounded figures drew an enormous bow, and a projectile cracked over Nathan, sounding like a supersonic high-caliber bullet. The other grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it. As soon as the rock left their hand, it began to grow, a fist-sized rock enlarging to the size of a person, then a car, and finally, into a boulder the size of a small house. Nathan's jaw was slack, his head turning to follow the boulder as it sped into the grave tangle, rocking it backwards. The silver-armored warrior had pierced into the creature's bulk and was barely visible from the surface, furiously chopping. Then, the mages started casting and the battle became hard to follow. Blue fire and white lightning struck the creature as more rocks pummeled it in a steady stream. More cracks sounded, and with each sound, a snake head disintegrated. Nathan slipped into focused mind, throwing his eyes wide to catch all the details of the battle. A barely visible blue barrier had appeared over the fallen adventurers and refugees, shielding them from the debris of the fight. Lotier noticed 3 achieved. The grave tangle struck back, the remaining snake heads vomiting fizzing liquids to strike at the new arrivals. They defended themselves with planes of force that deflected the spray to the side. The tentacles engaged the fighter, who dodged by kicking off thin air and slicing tentacles apart as the glow on their sword expanded to increase its length to something out of a ridiculous anime, or just a weapon suited to fighting something the size of a hill. The tentacles shattered stone upon impact, and several snapped out like mile-long whips to attack the other arrivals. Nathan couldn't track them, but the cracks of their movement could be felt from hundreds of feet away. The sound was deafening. Nathan sent a dribble of stamina to his ears to keep them functional. Mid-tier focused mind 2 achieved. The ranged fighters seemed to have survived, the rock thrower hiding behind a now-shattered boulder, while the mages flew in erratic patterns, slivers of force dancing around them. Nathan couldn't see the archer, but he could faintly hear their continued barrage. A deep inhalation drew Nathan's attention back to the grave tangle, and he saw it rearing back, blackened mouths open in preparation for another roar. Nathan could vaguely feel magic whipping past him, towards the monster. This burst of miasma would be more powerful than those before. Lotier noticed 4 achieved. Both mages stopped dodging. A triple layer of shielding blossomed between the tangle and the fallen convoy as the crystal atop the staff of one of the mages started shining brightly. The other mage cupped their hands, a bright light shining from the enclosed space. The beast exhaled with a mighty sound, less a beast's roar and more the sound of a waterfall or a crashing wave. It was muffled behind the shielding, but the tide of darkness that swept out was abyss black. The silver-armored warrior floating in front of the beast thrust their sword to the sky with a shout that somehow pierced the thunderous roar. Golden light shone from the armored figure and their sword, pushing back against the wave of darkness. Wisps of darkness swept around the light, which flickered. The wisps impacted the barriers, and the first of the 3 bowed back, looking like it would break any second. I feel like I'm in the middle of a Godzilla movie. A bad place to be. Nathan looked around for cover, trying to stay calm in the face of the incredible power being thrown around. There was nothing he could do to influence this fight. His options were to run away, hide, or stay where he was. If he ran away from the fight, he'd go directly past the rock thrower and underneath the mages, and that was begging to get collateraled. If he hid, he wouldn't get to watch the fight, or run if the grave tangle kept advancing. Nathan settled for crouching next to a small boulder, ready to duck behind it at any moment. He reactivated focused mind, sharpening his attention on what his defenders were doing. It looked like there was a brief pause in the fight. There was no trace of the first barrier and only shards of the second, but the third had held. The silver-armored fighter was backpedaling as the grave tangle drew itself up, more tentacles sliding out from all sides. More skeletal heads emerged from the central bulk, mostly amalgams of smaller bones instead of enormous snake skulls. Portions of the monster were blackened, and chunks were pulverized by house-sized rocks, but it remained the size of a geographical feature. I don't think of monsters in similar dimensions you would use to describe skyscrapers, no. Nathan noticed that the tentacles were of two types, some thicker and plated with bone, others thinner and enormously long. As it prepared to rejoin the battle, Nathan heard a high-pitched howl from behind him. The mage with cupped hands had never stopped charging their spell, and now they were obscured by a purple-tinted blinding light. Tentacles snapped out, but the entire group had shifted to defense, and the attacks were blocked by barriers or intercepted by sword, rock, and arrow. That pattern held for a moment, and Nathan struggled to perceive the attacks. They came like raindrops, spattering against the united defense of four impossibly powerful people. Low-tier Notice 5 achieved. The light grew brighter still, and Nathan had to look away, blinking against a blind patch of his vision. The screaming howl grew in pitch and volume, and Nathan clapped his hands over his ears. He looked back towards the grave tangle, which was quickly advancing up the hill, purple light reflecting off its front. Nathan hoped these new arrivals would get on with it, since the grave tangle was approaching the fallen convoy that contained Nathan's only friends in this world. A blue barrier sprung up above Nathan, protecting him from overhead. Nathan didn't get distracted, keeping his eyes on the monster even as his ears started bleeding and the light of the charging spell outshone the sun, casting the whole valley in harsh shadows. He wasn't going to miss this. The grave tangle abandoned a fence and shielded itself behind armored tentacles, layering them in between it and the charging spell. A moment later, the entire world flashed. Nathan squinted, trying to make out details with his damaged vision. A beam of blinding light connected to the grave tangle, punching through the defending tentacles and stabbing deeply into the pile of flesh. Then the beam spiraled outward, moving quickly and smoothly as steam and viscera jetted out in its wake. The grave tangle shuddered and attempted to shield itself, but anything in the way of the beam was annihilated. It's not reflecting, and it has significant momentum. That's not light, that's plasma. That spell probably compressed air and contained energy until it converted the air to plasma, maybe all the way to starting a tiny fusion reaction. Pending utility skill, low-tier identify, you have used external knowledge to accurately identify exotic effects. This skill will help you understand complex cues to understand strange objects and effects, will not reveal curses without obvious clues, and will not help you identify types of mana or spellcraft. Pending talent, mid-tier blinding resistance, you have gazed into a blinding light and kept some of your vision. This talent will turn this decision into a personal talent. Your vision will no longer be affected by intense light, and you will be able to discern details of bright objects regardless of their brightness. Will provide some protection from magical dazzling and blinding effects. Will not restore your damaged vision. Nathan pushed the notifications aside, careful to not accept or deny them as he channeled stamina into his eyes. He still had a reserve at 135/330. He focused on the top layers of the retina at the back of his eye, where the intense light would have damaged fragile optical receptors. Mid-tier regeneration rank 6 achieved. Mid-tier focused mind 3 achieved. The plasma beam petered out, and Nathan stared down at the blurry image of the charred, collapsing pile of flesh that had been the grave tangle. Then it started moving again, pulling itself together, visibly struggling despite being barely half of its original mass. Now it was only the size of a 10-story building. It's not dead. How do you kill it? Low-tier Notice 6 achieved. The high-level party was not idle, and the grave tangle was bombarded with arrows and rocks as the fighter and the mages approached. The ranged fighters focused on any newly appearing tentacles or heads, blasting them away as soon as they appeared. The tangle could only offer token resistance as it was torn apart piecemeal. Large chunks were cut away by the glowing greatsword and enormous blades of scissoring force. Then jets of blue fire were fired into the holes, cooking it from the inside. Quickly enough, the grave tangle was reduced to a pile of smoking flesh. Sweeping walls of force collected the offal into an enormous pyre, into which the mages directed a constant stream of flame until it was fully alight. The fire was enormous and sent curtains of dark smoke into the sky. One of them gestured, and a light breeze blew the smoke away from Nathan and the villagers. Nathan watched the whole proceeding, moving down the slope and back towards the comrades he'd abandoned. The flames were intense, and the corrupted flesh steadily crumbled to ash. You have leveled up to level 25. Congratulations! You have survived a fight between entities an extraordinary number of levels above you. Chapter 14 Paragons of Adventure. While Nathan walked down the slope, he considered his new levels. 27 was the breakpoint where he'd develop his class and get more class skills, and Nathan was a little disappointed that he hadn't hit it despite the disadvantaged buff. However, more levels meant more stamina and more powerful class skills, so Nathan certainly wasn't complaining. He looked over the pending options from Davrar. Pending utility skill. Low-tier identify. You have used external knowledge to accurately identify exotic effects. This skill will help you interpret complex cues to understand strange objects and effects. Will not reveal curses without obvious clues, and will not help you identify types of mana or spellcraft. Pending talent. Mid-tier blinding resistance. You have gazed into a blinding light and kept some of your vision. This talent will turn this decision into a personal talent. Your vision will no longer be affected by intense light, and you will be able to discern details of bright objects regardless of their brightness. Will provide some protection from magical dazzling and blinding effects. Will not restore your damaged vision. The blinding talent seemed like shit, and there was a good chance it would be permanent as well. He declined it. Watch, being immune to being blinded is going to end up being really important. The identify skill, though, that seemed incredibly general. Nathan hadn't been going for a skill like that, but Vihala had told him that it was easier to acquire skills and talents in a dangerous fight. Nathan hadn't been a true combatant, but apparently being in the blast radius counted. And it had directly followed him identifying the decisive spell as plasma-based, likely with a fusion component. Regardless, Nathan guessed identify would synergize well with notice. Congratulations, you have accepted the low-tier identify utility skill. Nathan was picking his way down to the switchbacks when a voice called out from behind him. You there? Are you an adventurer? Nathan turned to see a tall, rangy man with light brown skin and shoulder-length shining black hair. He wore an elegantly cut green shirt and tight, black leggings. His cheekbones were sharp, with a delicate jaw. His clothes were peppered with rips and small bloodstains, though Nathan could see no existing wounds. He had wide pouches on both hips, and was just finishing pushing a strung bow that absolutely should not have fit into the one on his left. Obviously, he was the archer whose shots had shattered skeletal snake heads as large as cars. Nathan turned to give the man a respectful nod. Not an adventurer yet, but I'm headed that way. The man smiled, seeming to dance over the rocks to approach Nathan. I'm impressed you were able to stay on your feet during all that, and your nerves are adamant. Here, Drink this and come help me check on the others." He pulled a vial out of a bag and tossed it to Nathan. Nathan identified it as a healing potion, having seen bottles after they'd been used on William. Nathan glanced down at himself, noting his slight limp and reddened skin, inflamed from exposure to the grave tangle's miasma. "Do I try to impress? Yeah, probably. They went out of their way to protect us while fighting, and people able to beat that are good contacts to have." He sent stamina to his ankle, repairing the skin and soft tissue. His skin color returned to normal in moments, and he leaped down to the path, using stamina to easily make the landing. "I'm good, but I can use it on anybody who's in a bad way." He tucked the potion into his satchel, remembering the part of magic resistance that said weaker magical items degrade when in prolonged contact with you. The man's eyebrows rose as he examined Nathan again, giving him a closer look. "I'm Leska Bola." He seemed to glide casually down the rough slope, landing in front of Nathan, arm extended. Nathan shook it, feeling hard, ridged calluses and dexterous fingers. "I'm Nathan Lark. Nice to meet you. Let's go help my friends." They set off down the road, quickly arriving at the head of the convoy, where some of the villagers were shakily getting to their feet. Everybody seemed weakened and agitated, with raw, inflamed skin. But only a few were truly in danger. Those were spiderwebbed with weeping cracks across their skin. Nathan followed Leska's lead, feeding small quantities of healing potion to those unable to stand on their own. He grabbed Sara and Duo and brought them with him, intending to introduce them to Leska. They worked their way down the convoy, arriving to find Eldred and Vihala conversing with a new figure. The new person was very short, maybe just breaking 4 feet tall. Nathan immediately noticed the dusky orange skin, long, pointed ears and sharp nose. Gray hair was worked into a complex braid that reached to the nape of the neck. She was dressed in tight-fitting clothes made of a black, supple leather decorated sparsely with snowy lace and looping orange embroidery that matched her skin. The outfit was spotless, completely unmarked by the fight, and very tight, emphasizing certain features in ways that were usually reserved for superhero movies. The white lace set off the colors nicely, contrasting in tone with the armored plates and knife sheath strewn across the outfit. As Nathan and Leska approached, the orange-skinned woman turned away from her conversation to smirk at Leska. "I see you couldn't manage to keep your outfit intact. I cannot guarantee my aunt will grant the same discount twice. Is everything in order?" For such a short frame, her voice was surprisingly gravelly. Her eyes flicked briefly to Nathan as if to ask why he accompanied Leska. Without his notice, Nathan would never have seen and interpreted that interaction. Leska grinned and gave a hand gesture like an OK sign, but with all of his fingers bunched together. Given the context, Nathan assumed it had a similar meaning. "Yup, all good. The refugees are mostly stable, but we should let Kier at them and then get to Gemor as soon as we can. In fact, we should probably head back as soon as these fine fellows are all moving. We don't want to be short if another team sets something off." He paused, looking back at Nathan. "Let me introduce you. Zarian, this is Nathan Lark. He's the one who shrugged off the grave tangle aura. Nathan, this is Zarian Dalna. She throws rocks and looks good, and her aunt makes the best clothes in Gemor." Leska fingered a rip in his tunic mournfully. Zarian lifted her chin as if offended, but the slight upturn of her lips betrayed that she enjoyed the banter. "I will inscribe our meeting Nathan Lark," she said formally, before turning to Sara and Duo. The couple were goggling at the shattered Valleycombe battlefield surrounding the enormous pyre. "Are the good villagers of Pilriden ready to move to shelter? We must abandon you to return to our duties, but you are close and escorted by fine company." Duo spoke hesitantly. We thank you, great adventurers. We appreciate your defense of us and can move whenever you say." He bowed deeply. Zarian frowned and looked back over the gaggle of villagers, many sprawled on the ground or holding each other. Do you speak truth, or do you speak that which I wish to hear? Duo rose from his bow and looked back at the villagers. He stammered, noticing all of the adventurers with their eyes on him. Sora cut in. I think what my husband means to say is that we're not in the best shape, but folk will push to get to safety. Any healing you have would be helpful. There are wounds aplenty, and those of us who can cast minor curing are out of mana. Leska cut in. Kia's headed over, so get everybody on their feet and ready to move out. She'll fix you up quick. Nathan turned to see the silver-armored warrior bounding toward them, jumping off thin air to ascend the rocky slope at an insane speed. Having just run the distance, Nathan estimated it as closer to car speed than running speed. The metal-clad figure landed surprisingly lightly beside the party. They were about 6 feet tall, and the bare golden greatsword on their back was nearly the same length. They reached up to take off the shining Dark Souls-style full helmet. Underneath was a pale woman, long reddish-blonde hair braided and tied around her head like a multi-layered crown. She looked like she'd just emerged from a 2-hour session with a makeup artist, instead of a battle against a monstrosity the size of a skyscraper. There were scars on her face, but they enhanced the strong-jawed profile instead of marring it. Her eyes were a bright blue and faintly glowing. When she spoke, the voice was low, clipped but not urgent. "Status," Leska replied quickly. "No deaths, no serious wounds, no hidden threats, one possible anomaly outside our purview." He tilted his head faintly, almost imperceptibly towards Nathan. "Hit 'em with an area heal and they can make their own way back." The woman Kia nodded, then looked around, taking an instant to focus on the faces of each person in the immediate group. She reached Nathan and paused, narrowing her eyes. "You know Aura, can anybody vouch for you?" Nathan looked to Leska, but it was Vihala who answered. "Yes, the giant traders vouch for him. Do you require a full accounting?" Kia was already turning away and putting her helmet back on, slipping it over the braid with no issues. "No. If you think it's worthwhile, I'll hear it later over a drink. We've got work to do." She leaped up, the greatsword springing into her hand. She floated 20 feet in the air, raising the greatsword to the sky. Nathan heard a quick but emphatic prayer, growing in volume from barely audible to a shout that cut through the sound of the roiling flames from the pyre. "By the goodness of these people, let them be healed. By my power, banish their weakness. By the holy light, no taint shall survive." The sword's golden glint intensified, as if it reflected the sun directly into Nathan's eyes. He saw a similar light shine on everybody around him. Nothing happened to him, but everybody else perked up. The villagers collapsed on the ground, rose again. Nathan saw previously inflamed skin return to a healthy pink before his eyes. Nathan felt the light on his own skin, but it didn't heal any of his scrapes or bruises. According to Nathan's spell sense, it was just another kind of mana. It was different than any Nathan had sensed before, like a prickling of warm needles. There was also a righteous anger in the mana as it washed over him, as if the mana was made of emotion. It was different from any of the spells he'd felt before and was rather unsettling. Damn, okay, gods are real. Do I need to find religion? More importantly, they're making a point of healing everybody here. If that was really a fusion reaction, it would have sent off a bunch of ionizing radiation. Should I watch out for radiation sickness? From what Nathan remembered, radiation was dangerous in both the short and long term. In the short term, it could shred cells, causing organ failure. In the long term, mutations would increase cancer risk. Maybe regeneration could properly fix those. Well, there wasn't much else to do. Nathan swept a wave of regeneration through his entire body, focusing on his brain and organs. He lost a surprising amount of stamina. Then he did it twice more, losing less stamina each time. He made a note to do it again later. You don't fuck around with radiation. The two mages seemed to decide that the grave tangle was well roasted and flew toward the group of adventurers, leaving the enormous pile to smolder. Nathan's inner Smokey the Bear worried about forest fires, but it appeared the wind was too calm for the fire to spread. A lot of trees had been torched in the fight, but the scattered fires seemed to be dying out instead of growing. As Nathan came to that conclusion, Leska and Zarian were surrounded by a nimbus of white light and floated into the sky, Leska giving a jaunty wave. They joined the mages floating maybe 30 feet up. From there, Nathan could examine the mages in more detail. They wore robes of a similar cut to one another, looking more like Jedi robes than anything too loose or draping. The one without a staff, who'd cast the Plasmalant spell, looked like a flame, with layered blue, white, and red fabric. He was a tanned human man in late middle age, with thin white hair and a wispy beard. The other mage with the staff wasn't human and had a snout and upturned ears. They were some sort of humanoid cat or fox person. Their clothes were an enveloping wrapping of blue and green, covering brown fur streaked with gray. Nathan saw the flame-garbed man do a double take as he scanned the group, focusing on Nathan. He swallowed as he met the man's shining eyes. It was like looking at an arc welder. But then Leska said something and gestured up the hill, and the entire group flashed away, accelerating rapidly back over the hill and toward Gemor. Everybody watched them go. Nathan looked around and then asked, "Who the hell was that?" Vihala answered him, a thoughtful look in her eye. "Those were the guardians of Gemor. I've always heard they were ridiculous, but I'd never seen them in action. It must be a delve day. That explains the grave tangle, too." Nathan was confused. Delve day. This time Eldred answered, turning to start hiking up the slope. Everybody followed his lead. Every month or 3, or when a quester shows up, the council declares a delve day. The guildmistress approves a few groups to go into dungeons or tombs or whatever. There's an application process. Well, except for the questers, he harumphed. And it's a day of readiness for everybody else. They put some real powerhouses on standby, in case something like that happens. He waved in the direction of the charred grave tangle. Nathan swallowed. So somebody woke that up, over there. He pointed towards the valley where the grave tangle had emerged. Eldred looked back. "Must've. I think there is a monastery of Quaz over there. Well, there was. It looks like it got scattered all over the place." He narrowed his eyes and pursed his lips. "I bet they'll issue a scouting job so they can check it off the threat map. Might try to get that one." The rest of the vanguard moaned, complaining about looking forward to a rest and a bath after days tromping through the forest. Eldred only laughed and mocked their lack of an adventurous spirit. Then he proceeded to question their love of coin. Nathan was busy chewing on some jerky to replenish his stamina, but he quickly swallowed it and opened his mouth to ask what a monastery of Quaz was. Vihala caught his eye and shook her head. It must have been common knowledge, or maybe she just didn't want Nathan's ignorance to stick in Eldred's head. Nathan's frustration was short-lived. It wasn't long before they crested the hill and looked down upon Gemor. It wasn't what Nathan expected. He'd been expecting a heavily fortified town. What lay in front of him was a colossal city, stretching across a huge basin in the middle of a mountain range. It was like looking down upon Los Angeles or Tokyo from a landing airplane, a metropolis that could hold uncountable millions that faded into the distance. Taller buildings stood here and there, some blocky and imposing, others smooth and graceful. But all of it was ruins. 6 layers of enormous curtain walls lay tumbled and crushed, regularly spaced over many miles. The spaces between were packed with partially and fully collapsed multi-story buildings. Patches of greenery sprouted from various places, especially surrounding a river in the distance that meandered through city blocks and pooled in old city squares. Then Nathan saw the heart of the city, barely visible at this distance. The 7th and final layer of walls were unbroken, cradled around one side of a steep hill, almost a mountain. The walls were tall and imposing even from here, surrounded by a wide, clear zone. A killing field. Gemor itself was built up one side of the tall hill, many miles away. The city ascended up to a ridge of overhanging rock that arched forward, threatening to fall onto intact buildings. The other side of the hill was a steep cliff of bare rock, terminating in the river that pooled on the other side of the hill. It was like looking at a town nestled under a stone wave just about to crash. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com Chapter 15. Gemor. At last it was after midday, and Nathan had joined everybody else in eating travel rations as they walked. The group seemed unwilling to stop and take a break when safety was near, implying they just had to push a little further and they'd reach safety. He'd been told that they'd arrive at Gemor later today, but that confused him. They would definitely arrive at the ruined city in the next half hour or so. But the central hill with standing walls had to be at least 20 miles away. Unless they were willing to push far into the night, Nathan couldn't see this group making it today. Also, it would have been faster to go straight down the shallow hill towards the enormous breaches in the outermost curtain wall. But instead, they descended the hill diagonally towards a massive and ruined gatehouse. Nobody had discussed it. They just set out, following Eldred and the vanguard. There hadn't been much conversation in general. Even the adventurers seemed beaten down and on their last legs. So Nathan kept his mouth shut and observed. Hard to ask a dumb question if you stay quiet. His questions were answered as soon as they reached the road in front of the gatehouse. It was intact and in good condition, a broad stretch of wide paving stones. The group quickly strung out as they stepped onto the road, and as he followed suit, Nathan understood why. Each step on the road carried you farther than it should. It was bizarre. Nathan did a few quick experiments, watching the ground nearby as he stepped forward. Each step covered a normal distance on the road, but the terrain beyond the road blurred by. He picked up a rock and tossed it off the road diagonally. It didn't speed up or slow down as it left the road, but the angle of the throw changed. It seems like there's some sort of lensing effect on the edges for objects, but not for light. The space on the road is compressed, yet things off the road look normal and the road isn't blindingly bright. That's either magical fiat or a truly impressive feat of magical engineering. I hope I don't break this thing by walking on it. Lotier Identify 2 achieved. If I only rank that up when I'm correct, there are some metaphysical implications to the skill. Can I speculate on the deep truths of Davrar and learn the truth by what causes an Identify rank up? Something to keep in mind. The road seemed unharmed by Nathan's passing, and he resisted the temptation to feel out the magic beneath his feet. The party sped through the dilapidated gatehouse and into the city beyond. The road remained clear, though Nathan saw places where ruins had fallen onto the road and been cleared away. The rubble hadn't gone far, piled on either side of the passage. At these tight spaces the vanguard and giant traders tensed, and Nathan noticed they'd grouped themselves to either side of the villagers, as if to protect them from flanking attacks. Upon noticing that, Nathan began paying careful attention to their surroundings. They'd already passed another curtain wall, and the state of the ruins varied greatly. Some areas were barely distinguishable from wilderness, mounds of broken stone overgrown with squat trees and vines, while others looked like they'd merely been abandoned for a few decades. The stonework was amazing, tight-fitting blocks carved with detailed patterns and reliefs that now served mostly as purchase for vines and dirt. Here and there, traces of paint clung to stone in contrast with the greenery. Farther along, Nathan saw why the adventurers were on edge. A group of six-legged scaled creatures lurked in the half-tumbled ruins of a building a few dozen yards off the road, watching them. They were the size of small ponies, with long, triangular snouts and forward-facing beady eyes. A third eye was embedded in the middle of their foreheads, glowing with a subdued brown light. The creatures faded in and out of the shadows enough that Nathan couldn't tell how many there were. He guessed between 5 and 10. Looking around, nobody else seemed to have noticed. The creatures weren't obvious, but they weren't exactly invisible. He looked again, squinting at the creatures, and felt something tingling against his eyes. It was subtle, like the feeling of brushing through barely felt cobwebs. Nathan's spell sense told him that this was some kind of soft, quiet magic. Nathan pointed and called out, "Hey, what are those things in that building?" Low-tier spell sense 5 achieved. Low-tier notice 7 achieved. One of the vanguards standing near Nathan followed his finger and then looked back at him quizzically. But William was just a few steps further ahead. He paused and cast a spell, causing the shadows in the building to ripple and then shred in a flurry of motion. The birdfolk cursed. "Harpy's tits! W got Earth Stalkers!" The Earth Stalkers prowled out of the building, 6 limbs moving with a smooth, low-slung grace. The vanguard and the giant traders reacted just as quickly, drawing weapons and forming up to face the approaching creatures. Vihala stayed a pace back as she unlimbered her recurve bow, knocking an arrow. The Earth Stalkers paused, evaluating the gathered adventurers and the villagers behind them. Vihala raised her bow, aiming at the lead stalker. It tracked the gesture, then bounded off behind another building, followed closely by the other 7 members of the pack. Everybody stayed tense for a moment before carefully resuming their journey. Eldred swore. Waking giants, that was a near thing, they shouldn't be back, but he turned to Nathan, eyeing him appreciatively. "Keep an eye out, good job." He clapped a hand on Nathan's shoulder, not gently. They continued walking, and Vihala stepped close to Nathan, speaking quietly. "Stalkers use magic to hide. They're hard to spot, even for me. Did you pick up notice?" Nathan nodded. "Before the grave tangle fight. Ranked it up a bit." Vihala let out an appreciative whistle and shook her head. "And your magic resistance helped you see through the look-away magic." She paused, choosing her words. "If you ever bargain with that insight, be sure to mention that. I've half a mind to drop one o' mine and bargain with you for it. Are you interested in another trade? My family would drop some valuable insights for this one." Nathan took a moment to consider. Was there any reason to keep the insights behind his magic resistance secret? Yes, there definitely were. He was worse at dealing with conjured projectiles than other magical attacks, and if other people understood his talent, they could know how to best attack him. On the other hand, it was a valuable chip, and he could potentially gain a lot by bargaining with it. On the other hand, can I even teach it? Duplicating the lack of magic in my body and the magic-resistant alchemical ingredients is probably beyond most people. I'd love to understand how all that works, though. Eventually. Vihala watched Nathan think, and by her pursed lips and slow nod seemed to know his answer even as he opened his mouth to speak it. "Sorry, Vihala, I'm both unsure if I should share it and if I can. There was some weird stuff going on around me acquiring the talent, and I don't know how we'd even start duplicating it." Vihala waved her hand at him to dismiss his apology. "Yeah, that's the way with some of the more powerful ones, to be sure, but you might be surprised what we can accomplish for a powerful talent, so keep thinking on it. I'm gonna introduce you to the guildmaster when I sponsor you to the guild, and tell her about the magic-resistant stuff." Vihala shrugged, justifying herself. She needs to know. Nathan didn't have much of a response to that, and following Eldred's instruction, he kept an eye out. They soon passed another curtain wall without a reappearance of the Earth Stalkers. At this point, unless the Earth Stalkers traveled on the road, they wouldn't catch up. There was also less cover, and based on the notable lack of whole stone blocks, Nathan guessed that Gemor had been mining the ruined city near the road for cut stone. Before too long, they reached the gates of Gemor proper. The city had been visible from many miles away, and Nathan hadn't quite appreciated the scale. The entire interior behind the 6th curtain wall had been cleared into a treacherous killing field, broken into a low rubble that threatened to foul footing and provided no cover. The walls surrounding Gemor were tall, over 100 feet. The bottom 60 feet were a single smooth surface engraved with enormous symbols. But the wall had been built even taller, and the top portion was built from mismatched blocks clearly taken from different buildings in the ruined city. They'd also had faintly glowing symbols carved onto them, tying the whole structure together. Despite its patchwork nature, the wall looked very solid. Not like I'm an architect, but it certainly looks like it's not going to fall over, unless something like that grave tangle tested it. In that light, it's not tall enough. But you don't build walls to keep out Godzilla. Unless you're in Pacific Rim. Never understood the wall in those movies, it never did anything. The magical road of space compression carried them quickly to an open area where the effect faded. 6 other similar roads approached from other directions, all ending in front of the only gate into Gemor. And that gate was a doozy. Big, metal, magical. It looked less like a gate than a pair of movable walls, which were currently standing open, thankfully. There was a portcullis that looked like it could be quickly dropped, and a set of guards standing outside waiting for them. The guards were dressed in matching breastplates and chainmail, armed with halberds, swords, crossbows, and signal horns. They split up and guided the villagers into lines, proceeding to inspect each and ask a few questions before allowing them to proceed through the gate. The adventurers stood at the back, and while they were clearly looking forward to safety and rest, Valhalla and Eldred had each reminded their groups that relaxing too early led to tragedy. They were on guard, eyes peeled. Nathan followed suit. Damn, this world seemed scary if you really needed to watch for an attack on your own doorstep. Then it was their turn to go into the gate, and there he hit a snag. The guard's helmet had a monocle held over one eye, and as soon as the guard examined Nathan, she jumped back with a yell, hand going to her sword hilt. Valhalla was standing close by and stepped forward, raising her hand in a placating gesture. It's okay. There's a full explanation for his absence of an aura. I, as leader of the giant traders, vouch that he's as human as he appears, and not a threat to Gemor. The guards all took a moment to process that. The one in front of Nathan looked from him to Valhalla, then spoke. All right, Valhalla, on your head be it if you let a soul eater into the city. We'll make sure this goes on the record. With that, they were through. The gate was more of a tunnel since the wall was nearly 100 feet across. Nathan noted the murder holes and more portcullises. At this point, any competent foe would just find a way to go around instead of trying to take the gate. The city beyond was quite urban. Wide, well-planned streets and buildings 4 to 8 stories tall, mostly made of stone, with the top few floors sometimes made of wood. Past a wide plaza fronted by warehouses and inns, all of the roads went up. The overreaching ridge of stone didn't reach this far out, but the curling crest of the hill was still visible from here. It loomed high above the city, which carpeted the steep slope beneath it. Gemor was a city, Nathan's earlier misconception caused by distance. People flocked the streets, all with places to be. Some sort of city officials were ready to take the villagers in hand, and the adventurers had fully relaxed on their home turf. They ambled up a road, past a few obvious inns, taverns, and shops, and turned onto another street that ran parallel to the slope. On the uphill side of this street was a large complex of buildings that was obviously their destination. There was a wide, wooden arch with a sign on it leading into a small stone courtyard. Around the courtyard wrapped several tall buildings of pale stone, but Nathan's attention was arrested by the sign on the arch. More specifically, the writing on the sign. Most specifically, the fact that the symbols were completely foreign to him. Shit, he caught up to Artha. Is the writing on that sign the same as the language we're speaking? Artha looked at him, realization dawning. Yes, you can't read it, he pursed his lips. You will need to learn. It's something to mention to the Master-at-Arms. This is the Adventurers Guild, and where we will be staying. Yeah, no duh, I need to learn to read. Hi, is this TL Spellcasting customer support? I have a complaint to lodge about a glaring feature missing from your translation spell. Nathan stayed next to Artha as they went straight across the courtyard, where Eldred threw open a wide pair of double doors. They opened onto a huge hall 40 feet tall, well decorated with colorful murals on the walls and banners hanging overhead. The space seemed to serve several purposes at once, with a long polished desk against the right wall manned by one clerk, with space for many more. The central space was mostly clear, though there was a ring sketched out on the floor in chalk and some benches around it. Various doors and staircases led deeper into the building. The left side of the space looked like a hangout spot, with scattered tables and couches served by a bar and kitchen on the far wall. The other notable feature of the room was the people. Maybe 40 adventurers stood or sat around the room, and they were all applauding, cheering, and stamping their feet. Eldred raised a hand in acknowledgement, but it was obvious that most of the praise was directed towards the giant traders. Vihala and Artha stood with heads raised high, accepting the praise with poise, while William hopped from one foot to another, cackling and waving his arms. Emerald looked uncomfortable but stood a bit straighter, hands on their weapons. Nathan was busy examining the adventurers. They were a riot of color, in many shapes and even more different styles of armor and armaments. Nathan counted at least 6 species. Humans were the most common at a bit more than a third of those present. There were half as many of the short orange-skinned folk like Zarian, with skin colors ranging from peach to rusty brown. The rest were split between small numbers of other species. Some were centaur-like peoples like Artha, though there was variety in the species of the hooved half. Others were bipedal human-animal hybrids, all apex predators Nathan noticed, mostly wolf or large cat adjacent, though there was one other bird of prey like William. Finally, there was a scattering of unique individuals, a hulking man with khaki-green skin, bulging eyes and teeth that protruded from beyond thin lips, almost an archetypal orc. A figure in a corner looked to be made entirely of dark ice, standing near another person of pale stone. Eldred had already sauntered over to the desk, talking to the clerk while a few people from the crowd came up to congratulate the giant traders. A gaunt man with sparse white hair that looked like Vihala's father came up and gave her a hug, while a few other centaur people congratulated Artha with small bows and serious words. Emerald exchanged quiet words with the orc, while William was mobbed by a small crowd of young mages of every species. Vihala beckoned Nathan over. "Uncle, this is Nathan Lark. We found him escaping from the new Archmage's tower, and he helped us take the fight with the slavers. Nathan, this is my Uncle Kadid. He's retired now, but he was the sneakiest ranger in Gemor in his day, taught me half of what I know." The man, whose skin was a shade darker than Vihala, reached out a bony hand to shake Nathan's. "I'll take the compliment, but we both know my sister taught you most of it. Speak her memory." He looked Nathan in the eyes. "You have my thanks for helping Vihala out. I'd hear that story if one of you would tell it." Nathan got in a "nice to meet you" before Vihala spoke again. "I'm sponsoring Nathan to the guild today, hope to get him in this cycle. Uncle, I want you to look out for him while we're ranging. He's important and earlier in his path than he looks." The old man didn't look surprised, but did look over Nathan again, not commenting on anything in particular. He nodded. "I will if Nathan will have me. Do you need help getting him settled?" Vihala shook her head. "No, I'm going to try to get a meeting with the guild mistress, explain things. Has it been a busy delve day?" Kadid answered with a wry turn of his mouth. "Not after the grave tangle. Kia said they weren't up for another significant fight, so a halt was called." He shrugged. "At least for the people who could receive and obey the signal. The backup team is the 7 Fools, and they don't have the weight for a fight like that. Apparently Sudriel doesn't want to take chances this close to the solstice." He gestured around to all of the adventurers gathered in the hall. "So far the only losses are presumed, but we're pretty sure the Grey Moon Order isn't coming back. They went into the monastery of Quaz. The grave tangle came out of it. And the wrecking crew hasn't come out of the fortress of the face they went into early this morning, so we're worried about them. But that's the adventurer's life. If they're gone, we'll remember until the ending. Vihala mirrored his statement, and it sounded formulaic. Remember till ending, Kadid continued. Anyway, there's a break now between the rush of the recall and the day's accounting. You might be able to get a meeting with Sudriel if it's important. He gestured with his chin toward the desks. And it looks like Eldred's done. The man was stepping back from the counter holding a set of looped strings threaded with coins. He went back to the vanguard, who cheered as he passed out the strings. Vihala caught Nathan's eye and jerked her head towards the desk, so Nathan followed her. The clerk watched them both approach, looking unconcerned. He spoke. "Hello, Vihala. I am ready to receive your report, but it appears there might be some complexities to it. Do you want to bump this upstairs?" Vihala nodded at him. "Thanks, Velek. Yeah, this is something that needs the guildmistress' attention. I know it's delve day, and this can wait if it needs to." Velek was already taking something from under the desk as Vihala spoke. It was a small yellow gemstone glowing with a faint inner light. He brought it up to his mouth, and his face blurred while his voice was distorted into nonsense. A few moments passed before another voice sounded, also blurred but with a noticeably different intonation. Velek nodded and put the stone under the desk, withdrawing something else as he stood. "Follow me." He slid out from behind the desk and headed toward a small door in the corner of the room. Vihala walked after him, and Nathan hastened to follow. He cast a look over his shoulder, and though most of the room was drifting back toward the bar, there were several sets of thoughtful eyes on him. Velek used the key he'd grabbed from under the desk to open the door, which led to a narrow stairwell. They passed several sturdy doors on their way up, but Velek led them to the very top of the building. Nathan counted out 9 floors in total. On Earth, Nathan would have been out of breath from climbing 9 flights of stairs. Here, his stamina barely dipped. At the top, Velek unlocked another door and led them into a tall chamber with several comfortable-looking couches and cushioned tables scattered around. One side of the room opened to a broad, gently sloped staircase that led down. The other wall held a sturdy door, and this was a door. It was bound in dark metal and covered with burnt runes, while being large enough for Artha to comfortably walk through. The wooden surface was dented and scorched but unbroken, as if somebody had taken a burning battering ram to it and the ram had lost and exploded. A small desk, neatly organized with reports and documents, sat next to the door, overshadowed by the door's bulk. Sitting behind the desk, just visible behind the stacks of paperwork, was a 3-foot-tall man whose skin was a shockingly bright orange. It matched the abstract patterns embroidered on his voluminous purple robe. His beard and hair were a bright, pure white, tied in an elaborate braid of plaits that dangled in a regular pattern from ear to ear. Wide-irised eyes studied Nathan intently as he approached, but the man made no comment. The enormous door swung silently open, and Velek stepped aside, waving them into the room before he turned to leave. Chapter 16 Adventurer Administration. Nathan and Vihala entered the room beyond, walking past the short orange-skinned secretary. The space was broad and tall, with a ceiling that slanted down on either side to match the roof above. There were large windows on the 3 walls that didn't house a door, overlooking the entrance courtyard and various training yards. The rest of the room was simple, decorated sparsely with objects that had the sense of being placed just so. On a wall to the left hung a pair of crossed, wavy swords which had to be nearly 8 feet long. Facing the swords on the opposite wall was a multi-string compound bow made of bone. A huge rug in muted colors was spread across the floor, almost fractal in its complexity. 6 chairs stood on the rug. Those chairs faced a desk which commanded the room. It was made of a wood a shade darker than that which made up the building, and held several stacks of yellowed paper along with a crystal ball and a magnifying glass on a flexible arm. A glowing, three-dimensional illusory map occupied the center of the desk, though it dissolved before Nathan's eyes, giving way to delicately carved wood. The haft of a spear, made of carved and varnished wood, leaned against the left side of the desk. It was placed in such a way to be easily grabbed by the woman behind the desk. The woman in question looked up, and the door swung shut behind them with a thud that Nathan felt through his feet. She put down a piece of paper and studied them for a moment. Her pink skin looked unhealthily blotchy. She had a threadbare cap on her bony head, and no hair was visible underneath it. Her hands were so thin as to be nearly skeletal. However, the gray eyes were bright and focused, banishing any sense of fragility. Something told Nathan that this was a woman who expected respect and usually got it. A bony hand gestured to the chairs, and Nathan followed Vihala's lead in sitting down politely. The voice that followed was rougher than Nathan had expected from such a thin woman. So, I had some time and expected to hear a story of how pragmatic, experienced adventurers, who should have known better, embraced a stupid risk, and somehow triumphed regardless. But it seems introductions are in order instead. Vihala was more nervous than Nathan had ever seen her, which was strange. She just won a victory for this woman and was being chastised for it. Guildmistress Elvaris, this is Nathan Lark. Nathan, this is the guildmistress of the Guild of Adventurers, Sudriel Elvaris. She turned back to Sudriel. I'll let Nathan give the details of his journey here himself. It's something you need to hear. Nathan, tell Guildmistress Elvaris everything. Quickly, though, we don't have much time. Nathan had decided to trust Vihala and wasn't about to back out now, and she seemed to trust this woman. He shrugged internally. I want this person to be impressed with me. If she thinks I'm worth it, she'll give me support and training. It's nice to meet you, Guildmistress Elvaris. To start with, I'm not from Davrar. I come from a different world, one with no skills, no talents, and no magic. I was summoned to this world about 5 days ago by Tldho Droxal, a new archmage of Giant's Rest. He cast a spell that taught me this language, then tried to recruit me to his cause so he could learn things from my world. I decided I'd rather not teach him. The guildmistress raised 2 fingers, interrupting him. Why not? Nathan hesitated for a moment, reflecting on his first days in Davrar and the decisions he'd made shortly after arriving in such a strange world. My world has had genocidal maniacs. I've studied them to understand how they convinced so many to follow them. That's who Tial reminded me of. Nathan felt a sliver of the boiling indignation he'd felt when Tial had tried to overwrite his free will. He sees himself and his people as the only possible good, and everybody else will either be used by him or destroyed. At the first sign of resistance, he used charm, then wiped my memory. I will not be used, and I'll kill him for trying. A faint smile appeared on the pale woman's lips. That sounds like a story worth the telling. How did you escape from an archmage? Nathan shrugged. My world doesn't have magic. Almost as soon as I arrived, I was offered the high-tier magic resistance talent. I accepted it before he tried to charm me and proceeded to bait more magic out of him to rank it up. He purged my memory once, but I'd left hints behind and broke the spell. Eventually, he decided to put me in a golem core. I broke free and almost killed him, but he teleported out. Nathan smiled at the memory of Tial's terrified face. With a broken nose and knee, I picked up a class good at fighting against magic and used it to break out of his tower to find the giant traders lurking outside. Vihala coughed, interjecting smoothly. You didn't mention that he hit you with a disintegrate first. You were missing an arm when we found you, and then you slapped aside a fireball from a guardian golem. Over the course of Nathan's story, the guildmistress' eyebrows had climbed steadily. She sounded apprehensive when she spoke. I want to hear of the slave raid in a moment, but first, "A missing arm, from disintegrate," Nathan replied. Vihala explained to me how insights work, and I used some knowledge from my home to create a self-healing talent that let me grow it back. He shrugged, flexing his left hand. "It's pretty cool. Hopefully she finds that impressive." A bony hand came up to pinch Sudriel's nose. "I wasn't asking how you grew it back. I was questioning why there was anything left of you after the disintegrate. But it seems high-tier magic resistance is the answer." She turned to Vihala. "So when the message of the slave raid came, you conscripted Nathan into fighting with you." Vihala opened her mouth, but Nathan spoke first. "I agreed to it. They told me what was happening, and I agreed to fight. It was a bit close, but we won." Vihala shot him a grateful glance, looking abashed. It was a strange look on the broad and heavily muscled woman. Sudriel noticed the interplay, but her response was short. "Elaborate on the fight, please." This time, Vihala took the lead. Classic Antimage tactics focused attention outward with front and rear attacks, then went for the mages with suitable fighters. Emerald and Nathan got in close and took 'em out. She shrugged. "That was it." "I didn't see much of it, but Emerald said that Nathan shrugged off every spell they had and broke mage armor with a single punch. I will note that Nathan has not had his first-class development yet. He's being tutored by Arthur in the ways of his clan." That last part seemed to surprise Sudriel more than anything they'd said so far. "Well then, I see. This is him. There are few better teachers for a path of rage than an elk treeborn. Nathan, has Arthur explained what this path entails?" "It is not for everybody." She suddenly looked concerned. He nodded back. "Yes, he has. I think it will suit me. He gave me an insight before the fight and it felt right. Vihala mentioned that I should join the Adventurers Guild." Vihala smoothly took over the conversation. "I did. One more thing. You'll probably get a report from the Guardians. When they saved us from the grave tangle, Nathan was unaffected by its aura. Dalo's detection spell didn't work on him, and I had to clear him at the gate too. He also noticed an Earthstalker ambush before it happened. I think his magic resistance talent is just amazing. It also seems to work well with other skills. I've given him some bow insights for his aid with the slavers." She paused, then launched into what sounded like a rehearsed proposal to the guild mistress. "I'm sure the current adventurer training group is underway, but Nathan should be added to them. He needs a bit of help to develop his class and then a few years as a basic adventurer. He needs to be protected from agents of Giant's Rest that'll come for him. I think he should join a promising team undergoing training and be allowed to develop himself safely." She shot a look at Nathan. "Well, as safely as can be." Guildmistress Sudriel Alvarez propped her head atop steepled fingers, considering the proposition. After a moment, she nodded. "You have had an eventful few days, and I congratulate you on your achievements thus far. Now, to briefly explain the situation that Vihala is inserting you into. I have long championed the need for an extensive training course that ensures competence and adherence to a shared set of rules for our young adventurers. We cannot tolerate blundering thugs. To insert you into the current group halfway through the training cycle goes against this, but the next cycle will not start for more than half a year, and I believe there are some candidate teams for what Vihala proposes." She paused for a moment, staring off into the distance with a faint frown. Then she continued, "It is unheard of for somebody to be such an effective antimage so early in their development. Your talents seem very powerful, but this means you hold things of great value. Beware of those who might covet them. I will speak to Jalba in the morning and see you brought into the current class. There are decisions to be made on which team you will join. But today is a delve day and much remains for me to accomplish. Nathan, you should stay with the giant traders until Jalba comes to find you tomorrow." She gestured to the door and the stairs beyond, so Nathan and Vihala turned to go. On the way out the door, Nathan looked over his shoulder and saw Sudriel studying him intently. She seemed to have a thought, speaking briskly. "And Nathan, later I may ask you for more details of your world, if for no other reason than to satisfy an old woman's curiosity. Think on what you would tell me." With that foreboding comment, they were finally dismissed and returned downstairs by a much larger and less direct route. Nathan noticed that the shallow stairs and high ceilings were built to accommodate Artha's centaur people. Before long, they returned to the great hall, where they were greeted with further cheering, hot food, and drinks. Vihala spoke to Velik at the desk and handed out several cords of coin to each of them, then guided Nathan through the worth of local coin and helped him order food. Nathan ended up with a rather nice lemonade-like drink, served warm. A beer sounded amazing, but there were a lot of reasons to avoid getting even slightly tipsy. At least not yet. Maybe once he had a better lay of the land. The food was great, though. Nathan was familiar with very little of it, but the meat was tender and rich. The vegetables oozed with flavor, and there was plenty to go around. After so long eating trail food, it felt like a feast. Nathan dug in gladly. He ended up going through several of the warm lemonades by a local custom that resembled a toast. Somebody would approach, then they'd touch mugs and both drink wordlessly. According to Vihala, it was an appreciation of the deeds of the person being approached, and the depth of drink was a measure of the appreciation. A sip from either party was considered an insult to the other, and Nathan was careful to match other people's drinking. Afterwards, most inquired as to tales of Nathan, and especially the fight against the slavers. Luckily, Vihala stayed around and told versions where Nathan distracted and struck down unwary mages with speed and guile. After a few hours, the party headed into rowdy territory, with drinking contests, arm wrestling, and people challenging each other to increasingly violent contests in the ring. More and more adventurers returned over the course of the evening. Most were exhausted and victorious, and spent little time at the party before disappearing into the rooms in the back. However, those who did stay and join the festivities were the centers of attention. Nathan was feeling the burden of the day. Days, really. So when Vihala caught his eye during a break in conversation and jerked her head, Nathan was only too happy to follow. Emerald had spent most of the night in a corner, quietly conversing with the orc and a few others. On seeing Vihala striding away, they bid a hasty goodbye and joined up, still wearing their helmet and armor. Artha had spoken to many, not spending too long with any given group. He caught up and exchanged a few quiet words with Vihala before again plunging back into the party. William was gesticulating wildly amidst a group of young mages of many species. They left him to it. Nathan followed Vihala and Emerald deeper into the building, where she led them unerringly to a cozy suite of rooms. There was a small lounge with basic amenities, and enough rooms for them all to have one each. A shared bathroom confirmed that the trough of running water approach was just how toilets worked on Davrar. The rooms were barely larger than the cramped beds. However, those beds were surprisingly soft, and Nathan was happy to get out of his stinking clothes and get some privacy. Nathan was tired. Not physically, his stamina was full, and he felt like he could run miles if he needed to. But his brain flickered through thoughts ceaselessly. There'd just been so much new information in the last few days, and he couldn't process it all, or even rank the importance of things. This was an entirely new world, and things did not work like Earth did, from the cosmology to the levels to the legal system. Nathan was worried about agents of Giant's Rest coming for him. He was worried he was being manipulated into being a good little foot soldier of Gemor, and he was worried about the city-destroying catastrophes that were apparently just pretty common. That grave tangle was, yeah, it was like seeing a skyscraper that wanted to kill me. He was safe now and needed rest, but it wasn't going to happen, not like this. He was jumping from speculating about talents and levels to thinking about the coinage of Gemor and the types of monsters and intelligent species he'd encountered, and not making progress on any of them. So Nathan did what he'd learned to do in these situations. He sat down on the bed, leaned against the wall, and thought about nothing for a while. Nothing needed to happen now. He started with the breathing, then just focused his attention on itself, nipping errant thoughts in the bud. He was better served doing nothing at this very moment than trying to figure out everything. He breathed, he centered himself, and paid close attention to nothing at all. It was time to live in the moment, and at the moment he was full, warm, and comfortable. Mid-tier focused mind 4 achieved. Then he was able to sleep. Chapter 17. On the town. Nathan woke to the smell of baked pastries. He reminded himself to get multiple sets of clothes that actually belonged to him, then put back on the borrowed clothes he'd been wearing for days, and emerged from his room. Artha sat on one of the cushioned chairs in the lounge. He was talking to a bleary Vihala who'd apparently just emerged from her room. There was no Emerald or William visible, and their doors were closed. Nathan's attention was drawn to a tray of pastries and a pitcher of milk set on the central table. He hastened to break his fast, finding that the pastries were incredible, sweet, and stuffed with honeycomb or fruit syrup. The milk was rich and warm, sweetened with honey. Either adventurers were treated like nobility, or the logistics of food preparation were different from what he expected. Well, Nathan wasn't about to complain. He tuned into the conversation between Vihala and Artha. They were planning a shopping trip and hoping to be able to afford various pieces of equipment with the money from the rescue. Apparently, they'd been saving for a more serious set of ranged armaments for Vihala and William. Their goal was to be able to crack lower-level mage armor. Nathan joined in the conversation. "Can I come along? I have some basic supplies to buy. Everything to my name was provided by the Adventurers Guild. Speaking of, do I have to return this?" He held up the bag he'd been given by the Vanguard, which contained basic survival tools. Vihala waved dismissively with a pastry. "No, it's yours. The guild figures anybody who needs one deserves the extra possessions. Come along with us. We've got some time before Jalba will likely come along. If you're not looking for anything too magical, you'll be able to afford a lot with your share." Soon enough, Vihala, Artha, and Nathan left the remaining pastries on the table for whenever Emerald and William awoke, and departed the Adventurers Guild. There was a cluster of shops nearby that focused on selling mixed high-quality mundane and magical goods to adventurers. When they picked up a travel pack for Nathan, he looked sadly at the displayed dimensional bags. They weren't even as expensive as you might expect. A pretty standard one would wipe out a bit more than half of Nathan's cash. But it's a bag of holding, magic that messes with the rules of reality. So cool. I'd be able to carry 100 feet of rope without compromises, and a grappling hook. But there was that line in his magic resistance that read, "Weaker magical items degrade when in prolonged contact with you," and he wasn't willing to test that out yet, especially on something that might explode when it failed. Maybe once he was an actual adventurer and had more money to burn, or further develop the talent. At a shop run by another short, orange-skinned woman, they picked up a couple sets of tough clothes, thick woolens in basic patterns that wouldn't rip easily and would stay warm through cold and wet weather, while also being loose enough for warm conditions. A thick blanket for cold and rough conditions completed the purchases before they set out to another shop. On the way, Nathan asked, "Artha, can you explain the different species of Gemor? I've seen a lot of the short orange-skinned people and don't know anything about them." Artha nodded sagely. "They're called the Nulls, an old race though not as old as humans, pretty widespread, and their culture emphasizes appearance and poise. Nulled apparel is never the cheapest, but it's always high quality and they set the styles. The other peoples here are the tree-born, four-legged like me, and the various kinds of folk. Wolf folk, cat folk, bird folk." We all tend to live in our own rural communities, but there's a neighborhood with many who have decided to come to the city from outside." He snorted, twisting his lips in mild contempt. "While Giant's Rest is a much bigger city than Gemor, they don't take kindly to any peoples but yours. There are a smattering of others here, often from far away. The Orcish Empire of Agon lies across the plains, but they think us uncivilized. A few elementals as well, but their peoples are new and very insular." Nathan tried to formulate a question to that, but they soon arrived at their final stop, a blacksmith's shop run by a cousin of Vihala's named Beatrid. The burly smith clapped her cousin on the shoulder and showed them around some of the enchanted gear for sale. The quality of the metalwork really impressed Nathan. The weapons and armor on display looked smooth and flawless. Many of the enchanted pieces had elaborate engravings and cutouts that looked like the product of a machine shop instead of a blacksmith's forge. Nathan peeked into the working space in the back and saw that it was a lot more than just a forge. There was some kind of fly press back there, as well as a grinder and what looked like a drill press, though Nathan had no idea how they were powered. Magic maybe, or just good old-fashioned muscle. Artha guided Nathan to purchase a pair of sturdy knives, one with a wide blade the length of his hand, the other just a couple inches long. They weren't enchanted, but had a heft and balance to them that Nathan had never felt with kitchen knives. They returned to the guild to find Emerald sitting awkwardly next to a grizzled man with reddish-brown hair and a scruffy beard. He was dressed in a sharply embroidered but badly stained coat, taking sips from a jeweled flask. He looked worn down and tired, haggard in a way that seemed bone-deep. Vihala inclined her head to him. "Jalba, apologies for keeping you waiting." The man stood and limped slightly towards the door, slipping the flask into his jacket. "I just arrived. Keep up the good work, all of you. I'm here for this one." He waved a hand in Nathan's direction. "You ready to go? Best say your goodbyes." Nathan hesitated, looking at the giant traders. It wasn't like he wasn't going to see them again. But he wouldn't be part of their crew anymore, however transient it had been. They'd been something he could trust in a strange world, answering his questions, giving advice, and helping Nathan feel safe after his experience with Tial. "Thank you all so much. I hope to talk to you all again. Artha, I look forward to your lessons." The big elk centaur nodded. "Yes, there are times for personal instruction during the adventurer training." "I will see you then, and if we are not around then Kadid should be able to help you." Nathan turned to Emerald. "Good luck. I'll keep working on what you showed me. It doesn't matter what it's called if it does what I need." The armored fighter nodded back resolutely. Finally, Nathan turned to Vihala. He stepped forward and gave the stout black woman a hug. "Thank you for everything. In a few years let's talk about that plan again." She returned the hug, then slapped his back and stepped back, a sharp grin on her face. "I'll wait for it." Jalba led Nathan down the corridor and outside. They walked toward another building farther back in the complex. On the way, he detoured through a small park with a stretch of grass, a few trees and some heavy stones engraved with words. It felt like a small monument to some past war or tragedy. Jalba gestured toward a stone bench before he sat heavily. He waited until Nathan sat next to him, gazing out towards the outer wall of Gemor and the taller ruins peeking over in the distance. "I don't like you joining the course like this. Sudriel and I, we're trying to change the adventurers with this training course. Teach some basic competence, enforce some standards on the next generation, get insights flowing, and help shape the teams of the next generation. Make the course into tradition instead of just sending idiots out to die and calling the ones who survive adventurers." He paused after those words, staring off into the distance with a cruel twist to his lips. Jalba raised the flask and took another slug. After a moment he passed it to Nathan. Nathan sniffed the opening. It smelled like fruity alcohol and Nathan took a cautious sip. It was strong and sweet like a peach brandy. He handed the flask back. Jalba took it and continued. I'm behind all that and every exception undercuts it. And you, Nathan, are an exception. Guildmistress told me that you've got two amazing talents but are under level 27, and that I shouldn't ask where you're from, just toss you into the most promising team we've got. He shrugged. But this year, that means more than most. We just had to take somebody out from the heirs last week, so that's where you're going. But I gotta caution, you're not stepping into a simple situation. You're old, low-level, and your hands are soft. You ain't used to rough living, and you've got the guile of a beached fish, so I'd not do this without Sudriel's order. But I won't throw a kid to a muck-grabber, so you deserve to know what's what. The heirs are exactly what their name says, the inheritors of some of the strongest of Gemor and their insights. He slipped the flask back into his jacket. But they're also a right mess. Kia's adopted kid is trying to be the leader like his ma, but he's too busy being righteous and intimidating to think wise. The Caxal kid is smart, but is also a spoiled brat up her own braid on her magic. The Crusen's twins are serious, but it's just them trying to be their legendary duh. They all need to loosen up and figure out who they are, instead of being wrapped up in their parents' legends. Jalba sighed, then turned to Nathan and waited until he looked back before continuing. I'm telling you all this because you're older and you've stared the ghoul in the eyes in a way that few of my trainees have. The heirs are a bunch of horny youngsters who expect to be the heroes of the age, and they stand a half-decent chance if they don't run towards the first stupid threat that comes along and get themselves killed. So, I don't want you to break the sky. I want you to keep the heirs grounded until they can. Do you hear me? Nathan grimaced. Not because this was a bad idea, he could see where the guildmistress was coming from. If Nathan was targeted by Giant's Rest, might as well put him with the other targets so they could all be more easily protected. He also guessed that she wanted to tie him to Gemor with powerful comrades. This sounds like college drama all over again. I think I might prefer to go fight one of the guardian golems outside Tial's tower. Still, he returned Jalba's sigh and spoke. Yeah, I think I can. You have any recommendations to make a good impression? Jalba eyed him for a moment, then seemed satisfied. It's not hard. They didn't think the last guy was good enough, so they pushed him hard enough that he snapped. They'll test you, but if they think you're worth knowing, then it'll all flow downhill. The grizzled man slapped his knees, then got up. Time also flows, so let's get to it. Schedule is pretty simple. 3 meals in the dormitory, classroom work in the morning, then group training after lunch. There's time for individualized training after that, before dinner and sometimes after. We do bigger exercises at night sometimes, but not usually. The giant traders said they'd cover your individual training for the near future. Is there anything else you want to ask about for that? Nathan sighed. I was granted this language by spell, and it didn't teach me how to read. Can we take care of that during the morning classes? Jalba waved his hand. I'll have a clerk take it over. Glad you don't need convincing that reading is important. The number of times I've had to convince kids without 2 decades that their job is more than killing things. He shook his head. We'll see it done. Anything else you think I need to know? Nathan hesitated, then decided. If he wasn't told, then he needs to know. This, at least. There'll probably be agents of Giant's Rest coming after me. I made a personal enemy of an archmage. Jalba sighed, hand reaching for his flask before he stopped and smoothed his stubbled chin. Sudriel mentioned that's part of why we're tossing you into the heirs. They're all targets, but if you pissed off an archmage, he shrugged helplessly. Be careful. It's not like there's much more I can do for security. To get to the training grounds, you need to go through the entire guild, and everybody knows everybody round here, and there's no teleporting on the hill. Then he stood, straightening his stained coat. Well, let's go introduce you to your team. They should be just started lunch. Chapter 18, Introductions to Last Jalba, led Nathan toward a low building further back in the complex, against the walls that braced the slope. It was up a staircase set into the steep hillside, and surrounded by various bare areas that looked like training grounds. One looked like a shooting range with glowing targets, while another was a set of arenas with different kinds of environments, and yet a third appeared to be an obstacle course from hell, complete with deep pits and spiked walls, and a section that definitely involved dodging spinning blades. Lovely. Jalba blithely ignored Nathan looking around nervously and walked straight into the low building, entering via a pair of arched double doors. There was a label over the doors, but Nathan couldn't read it. Damn it. They immediately turned left and entered a small cafeteria, filled with picnic-style tables, about half of which were occupied by people chowing down on food from a buffet on the other side of the room. There were between 4 and 6 people at each table, and 6 tables of the 9 were occupied. The people were as varied as the adventurers Nathan had seen before, and though the species were somewhat mixed, there was certainly a tendency for each table to be a majority of one species. The other thing Nathan noted as they entered was that the average age was rather young. He couldn't judge the other species in the room, but all of the humans looked like the college freshmen from the introductory biochemistry classes Nathan had taught, except they were pretty fit, and many were dressed in armor and had weapons at their sides. Why are they armed? Didn't they just get out of class? The room wasn't exactly quiet. Cutting through the buzz of background conversation was a shouting match, and Nathan and Jalba were walking towards the source. 2 figures were standing chest to chest, glaring at each other. One was a wide, black-skinned human in dark, multi-layered chainmail, while the other was a wolfman in gleaming platemail looming over him. Nathan tuned in to hear the wolfman, who was yelling louder. "You will sit down unless you want me to sit you down." The black guy took a step backward, bristling. He opened his mouth. "You can't." The rest of his words were cut off as Jalba strode forward. Suddenly, Jalba's presence filled the room, and it was impossible to not pay attention to the grizzled man. Even the people in the far corners of the room turned in unison, and all conversation cut out. Jalba stepped up to the 2 young men, his voice slow and resonant. "You bicker as sparrows. Remember that one day you may stand shoulder to shoulder against the end. Be seated." The wolfman in shining armor opened his mouth, but Jalba silenced him with a look. The man in chainmail retreated to a table on the side of the room, while the wolfman sat at the table in the center. Then, Jalba's presence quieted, and he was again just a man in a stained jacket. He looked down at the wolfman in shining plate sitting at the table with 3 others. His voice was softer but tinged with scorn. "Kacha, you know better." He glanced toward Nathan. "I am here with a new 5th for your team. This is Nathan. He's got 2 powerful talents and can contribute more than you know. He's also from far away and so does not know you. Please introduce yourselves." The wolfman in gleaming plate armor twisted around to appraise Nathan more fully, a hint of canine teeth visible behind thin, colorless lips. His face was fairly humanoid, except with outward jutting jaws and enlarged nostrils. Hair of a rich brown color crept down to his eyebrows and around his cheeks, hiding sallow gray skin. His voice wasn't as deep when he spoke normally and was rough around the edges. "Definitely not from close by, and you have the look of a giant's rester. I'm Kacha Cordavia, worshipper of the god Damon and son of Kia Cordavia of the Guardians of Gemor. I lead the heirs." A snort from across the table interrupted him, and the handsome man sitting there broke in. "He's declared himself leader, at least. Gotta see if he can wear it as well as he does that stack of steel he calls armor. I'm Arl Crusens, son of Stanel Crusens. This is my sister Sarah." He elbowed the lanky teenager sitting next to him, who rolled her eyes and scooted down the bench away from her brother, not taking her narrowed eyes off Nathan. They were certainly related and looked about the same age. Coppery-skinned with large, dark eyes and pitch-black hair, the pair radiated a serious intensity. Combined with their lithe muscularity and metal-inlaid leather armor, their presence was almost magnetic and definitely attractive. They were also both definitely under 20 years old, so Nathan wasn't going to follow that line of thought any further. "And then there's me, of course," spoke the last person at the table. She was clearly a mage, wearing green robes embroidered with spiky light blue thread that seemed to writhe against itself. Her hair was gathered in a reddish-brown braid that was pulled forward over one shoulder, and her skin was pale and dusted with freckles. "I'm the one you really need to watch out for, since I'll blow you up. I'm Stella Caxal, and my parents are on Kachai's mom's team." She gave him a sly wink. "You know, I'm glad I got to see the Guardians of Gemor in action against that grave tangle. Otherwise I'd be confused why they were leaning on their parents' names so much." So Kachai's mom was the paladin in shining armor who went toe-to-toe with the grave tangle, and Stella's parents were also on the team. Both mages maybe. They kept their eyes on Nathan as he gauged his next move. They weren't giving much away, good or bad. Well, Nathan had made friends in the past by being earnest and straightforward, and this time he had a skill to help out. "It's very nice to meet you all. I haven't had lunch yet, so I'm going to grab some food. It's all new to me, so every meal is an adventure of one kind or another." He bid goodbye to Jalba, who had watched the introductions warily. As the teacher walked away and Nathan turned to get his food, something slapped against his leg like a pool noodle. It felt like magic, and if it had been strong enough for him to feel, it probably would have knocked most other people off their feet. He glanced back at the table, where all 4 members of the heirs still watched him. Stella had a surprised look on her face, and Nathan just threw back his head and laughed as he walked away. As he collected food from the plentiful buffet, Nathan considered his next move. The heirs were clearly testing him, trying to decide if he was good enough to let into their little elite club, and the presumption was clearly no. It was so dumb playing status games with people the age of those he'd taught, but it would happen one way or another, as long as he wanted to join the heirs. Which he did. The guildmistress had gift-wrapped him powerful allies, if he could just deal with some stupid power dynamics. From what had been said, it seemed they lacked direction and had potential without purpose. It so happened that Nathan had purpose to spare and was happy to share it around. But if he was going to play their game, at least he could do it on his terms instead of theirs, lean on his strengths, and talk about the true life-and-death experiences he'd had in the days since coming here. Jalba had seemed to imply the heirs were a bit pampered, and true life-or-death stories fighting giants rest would likely hold their interest. Other than that, if he played along as one of the gang, they would be unlikely to really get serious in their harassment. As he walked back, he workshopped his response. Getting closer to the table and depositing his plate of roasted meat and stewed vegetables, he put forward his best effort in a wry tone as he sat next to the young mage. "Good thing you didn't try that as I was coming back with food, Stella. I might have dropped the entire plate on you." It got a chuckle out of the sister of the 2 siblings across the table. What was her name? Sarah. Yeah, Sarah. She seemed to be enjoying Stella's uncertainty over her spell not provoking the expected response. Koch also eyed him with uncertainty as Nathan sat next to him and began eating as if the entire situation was the most normal thing in the world. Their plates were already half-eaten, and they finished them off as Nathan wolfed down his food. The pastries in the morning had been good, but this food was well-spiced and as filling as any Nathan had ever had and very effective at refilling his stamina. As he dug in, Arl asked a question. "Jalba said you were from far away." "Where?" Stella broke in, speaking scornfully. "I bet it's a little hamlet a few weeks away, a bundle of cottages behind a dinky palisade, with what, like 100 people?" Nathan took a moment to respond, savoring a bite of some nicely marbled meat. "It's a country called the United States of America. Doubt you've heard of it. I didn't leave it by choice, but here I am." Arl shot questioning looks to Stella and Koch, and they both shook their heads. He looked back to Nathan with brows raised. "United States sounds like there's history there. What is it like? Nathan considered his answer for a moment before replying, leaning on earnestness skill to pull off a dramatic touch. He had to appear unique to seem equal to his new teammates. It's a country of hundreds of millions of people, most knowing only peace. For all of our petty evils, we enforced peace and funded knowledge with no law declaring one above another. I hope to go back one day, once I've explored Gemor and toppled the towers of Giant's Rest for their evil. He delivered the last line with a snarl, savagely tearing at the next bite of meat. Low-tier earnestness 6 achieved. The heirs were various degrees of surprised by his display. Stella only furrowed her brow while Kachai rocked back, clearly perturbed. He spoke, suddenly hesitant in the face of Nathan's clear anger. You speak of Giant's Rest with true hatred. They are our foes, true enough, but what drives you to speak such words? The question seemed to be asked with honest curiosity, and Nathan felt he had an opening. Only what a would-be chattel would know. It's not something you can forget, to face somebody who wants to make you a thing. Nathan's face twisted in a sneer, finding that the memory of Tial made his expression less performative than he'd intended. Nathan's anger colored his next words, and he met the eyes of each member of the heirs as he continued. Giant's Rest is despicable, deeming itself above all. An archmage tried to convert me and then control me. I broke his bones because violence is the only counterargument against that violation. Giant's Rest would have everybody here in chains if it could. I'll burn their city to the ground and salt the earth. There was a moment of silence as they processed his words. Then Sarah quietly asked the question they'd all been thinking. What was fighting an archmage like? Nathan answered quickly. Terrifying. I caught him off guard and he still almost killed me, despite my advantages against magic. I wasn't able to kill him, but I broke his nose and knee before he teleported away. His name is Tldho Droxal, and he'll probably send people after me. From what I hear, you're all already targets of Giant's Rest because of who your parents are. I've got a blood feud with an archmage, so I'm in the same boat. I'll watch out for you if you watch out for me. Low-tier earnestness 7 achieved. They were clearly off balance, not expecting his serious turn of phrase and offer of camaraderie. Stella caught on to something he'd said, near to her interests as it was. What do you mean, your advantage against magic? Nathan obviously looked around. Let's not talk about that here. I've got some pretty unique talents, don't want to talk about them somewhere they'll spread. I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to show you later. Anyway, I'm new here, this is my first day in Gemor. What can I expect from the training? Kachai was the first to speak, though Arl looked like he'd been about to answer. Next we will train as a group. After that is individual training. Do you have anybody coming to tutor you? He asked the question as a challenge, clearly expecting Nathan to lack a tutor. Nathan nodded. Yup, I do. Kachai frowned but continued. For the group training, I am thinking of a round at the target range where Stella and Sarah shoot and we dodge. Nathan, are you feeling like target practice? I can heal you if you get hurt. His mouth curved up in a predatory grin, which had a new meaning on somebody with a canine snout and teeth. Given the expectations, Nathan didn't have a choice in his response. Definitely. I've actually been working on a talent development that could only be aided by somebody hitting me with as much magic as possible. He grinned in Stella's direction. Do you think you can manage that? She harumphed, leaning back. Be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. Arl wiped his brow theatrically. If you're volunteering to be the one chewing down fireballs, I'm all for it. Those things can blow through a solid wall. His sister jeered at him. That's just because you're slow. Get faster with your footwork skills and it won't be a problem. He eyed her darkly. Arrogant coming from somebody who doesn't have to dodge fireballs as training twice a week. We should practice melee more often. Stella broke in, smiling sweetly and speaking in a sing-song voice. But that's not how we work. Between me and Sarah, we have the ranged advantage. If you chunks of muscle can keep the enemies at bay, we can take them down and steal all the levels. Then her eyes tracked to Nathan and she pouted theatrically. But if we've got yet a third close-up fighter, then maybe we'll need to change the tactics. Annoying. Kachai spoke, clearly trying to re-establish his leadership. We'll have to see how Nathan fights. It sounds like he's had combat experience already, so I'm sure he can do something. At least it sounds like he'll be better than that last idiot. Nathan had reservations about how fairly the last guy had been treated, but raising that point didn't serve a purpose. He didn't have enough context to understand what was going on with the social dynamics here, and he didn't want to poison his relationship with the heirs over guesses. As he mused, Nathan noticed that the people around them had started to get up and deposit their plates on a table next to the mostly bare buffet. Sarah looked around. Looks like it's time to head out. Welcome to the heirs, Nathan. I hope you fit in. You mean you hope I measure up to all of you? We'll just have to see how that goes, he responded in an upbeat tone. Together we'll journey onwards and upwards. Arl slapped the table as he stood. I like that. Onwards and upwards indeed.